Distinguished participants, this is the second and the last session of today. I would like to welcome you all. On this session, we'll be speaking about the wind business outlook in Turkey, lessons learned from local and global markets, and business model benchmark. I would like to invite Deputy Minister of the Republic of Turkey, Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, Abdullah Tancan, please, and our distinguished panelists one by one. From Polat Energy CEO Zeki Eriş, please. Demirer Holding Chairman of the Board Erol Demirer. From Gürüş Ali Karaduman, General Manager. From Borusan ENBW Energy General Manager Mehmet Acar'la. Exim Investment Holding General Manager Sabahattin Er. So that's the start of the panel. Distinguished guests, I would like to once again express my deepest gratitude to all of you on my behalf and on behalf of our panelists. Welcome. I hope that this panel will be very fruitful for us, for the panelists, and for the country and for the industry. Of course, we'll be having a discussion, a debate in here, and I hope that we'll get some productive outcomes. So, just to briefly summarize what we'll be discussing today, we'll be speaking about after 2020, the post-TWEC process, what is going to be, what will be needed, and then for the acceleration of the investments, what we have to do, what type of obstacles we have in front of the investments, and so as to overcome these investments, what we have to do, what type of solutions we can offer. We'll be discussing these topics. And as you all know, we actually have different auction systems so far. And as you know from the opening addresses, as the president of the Energy Market Regulatory Authority stated, for a 2,000 megawatt will be receiving applications. And after the technical assessment, again there will be an auction for capacity allocation. In the methodology and the conditions of the application, what we should change so we can have better auction, and how we can actually minimize the problems that we already have if we, for example, change the methodology or the system in the next auction. And we also have ongoing power plants. What type of obstacles that the investors are having, especially in terms of the permits, what we can do, what type of initiatives we can take. We have almost 1 year until the end of 2020. What kind of incentives will be needed after 2020? Because we don't have any incentives yet announced. So the investors are considering the already existing incentive scheme that we have. So they are now considering the already existing system. So we'll be discussing this together. We'll be discussing about capacity allocation methods. We'll be discussing about the benchmarks in the other countries, how these investments are performed. There were some investors that asked for capacity increase, and we meet some of their requirements but fail to meet some others. We'll be discussing about those. From time to time, there could be some environmental impact assessment lawsuits that are ongoing. The Ministry of Energy or the public or the other public agencies in particular, whether they can act together with the investors, or what are the in particular underlying factors that we have such lawsuits on the environmental impact assessment. And there are also some power plants with some high contribution fee. They also can have some trouble. Maybe we can discuss about this. And also, in the new auctions, as you all know, there are some requests to include a year of experience in the new technical specifications for the auction. So we'll be discussing what the pros and cons will be, whether it would be good for our industry, for our country, or whether it will actually bring up some new obstacles. So we'll be discussing these.
Panelimize katılan katılımcıların şirketleri ülkemizdeki işletmedeki kurum.
Looking at the representatives of the companies, they are actually representing more than 1/3 of the installed capacity of the country.
Ben sizin adınıza da onlara tekrar hoş geldiniz.
I also would like to welcome them.
Ve sırayla
So, one by one, I'll be giving them the floor. So I would like you to elaborate on the topics that I mentioned. So if you allow me, I would like to give the floor to Zeki at the very last, because I'm afraid that once I have given them the floor, he probably would discuss all matters and will not leave the floor to the other panelists. So I decide not to give him the first floor. So from Gürüş, I would like to start with Ali Karaduman. Yes, the floor is yours. Thank you. Distinguished moderator and distinguished participants, of course, discussing about wind with a very important personality in the sector like Erol. It's an honor for me, and I actually did it with the geothermal power plants, and actually he is one of the first who started the wind energy. So it is 501 megawatts. So I think the wind is blowing, quite a heavy wind is blowing. Polat, Erol, and at Borusan, we just work together. We join actually the auctions all together, but in the wind industry, as you all know, as a person that comes from the backstage, from the kitchen side, I can say, we had a lot of challenges. It was more in the past, and especially, even for example, some of the challenges were less. The permit process actually was shorter, but now we have more challenges. For example, I started, for example, in the past, 3 power plants, for example, in a year, and even completed the acceptance process. But now it is just one in a year. At Kocatepe, for example, we laid the foundation, and hopefully we'll finish it by this year. Of course, speaking about challenges and being in the wind industry is maybe easy, but thank you very much for the government because they gave us the opportunity to go up to 501 megawatts. Of course, we would like to be the driving force. What are the challenges that we have? I will just go bullet by bullet. And we were at lunch with Zeki. I think that's the reason why Zeki will be taking the last floor. And I myself will speak about the challenges from the perspective of Gürüş. My first topic, now for the wind power plants, as you all know, you have the permit process, the construction, and the temporary acceptance, provisional acceptance. It takes 3 years, as you know. In the past, for example, what we were doing, even the capacity increases were included in that 3 years, and then megawatt E that we receive, and then after the approval by the regulatory authority, we increased that. In a couple of projects, we did it, and we completed the capacity increase, but the capacity increase stopped after a while. You know, even there is, for example, the development plan that we perform just like this. I mean, we just, you know, established such a system. Especially there is redundant capacity for the turbines that we have. So we just would like to make them available, the redundant capacity. So I would like to mention that, Mr. Deputy Minister. You know, we are the people working hard for a long period of time, and therefore you need a foreign partner. And mostly they are our suppliers. And with the world-class suppliers that we work together, and we have our plans and the cash flows and all. But of course, we're just planning our own cash flow, and you don't have a financial institution do so. All the IRIs and all the we perform all, for example, technical presentations and administrative presentations, but especially for the power plants under the YEKDEM.
Bizim YEKDEM konusu tabii çok uzun süre.
We finance them faster. You know, YEKDEM is quite a long process. Erol, for example, had an idea, and I agreed with him, and I'm sure he will elaborate more on this, but we are all actually fixed to October 31, 2020. That's how we're working on. I mean, we fixed to that. But we're just having nightmares. What if we cannot fail to do this? I mean, we have huge projects. So our kind request from the government is that maybe YEKDEM can be extended for a couple of more years. So at least the projects will be completed under YEKDEM, or if the YEKDEM duration is going to be 10 years, at least it will be deducted from that 10 years, the more that we delay it. That is actually our kind request. So I think we, for the wind power investors, so you're saying for the ongoing investments? Yes, for the ongoing investments. You have the license, and for the ongoing investments. I mean, if the investment has not started yet, especially at this stage, I can say, of course, as you know, we have so many trials about the environmental impact assessment reports. For example, I visited Hacı and 380 separate files and lawsuits filed for one power plant. So, also, as the investors, we have problems about this for the environmental impact assessment approval. I mean, for example, if it is overruled and it goes to the Court of Cassation, sometimes the Court of Cassation also overruled it or accept the file. I mean, it takes 1-2 years. I'm speaking about the ongoing ones. And therefore, they also have to be included in this because, you know, having a license is important and it's a value. I mean, we need this wind potential for Turkey, and it is if it is 7,600 out of 50,000 that we are using, we are the driving force as the private sector company. So we actually should be encouraged. So our kind request from you is we hope these projects will be completed. So I don't know if there are some delays, and you can reflect those delays. Another challenge is in general taking the permit. You know, getting a permit and completing the entire process. For example, I was in direct contact with the bureaucracy in the past, but now for some of the problems, we do the application, you just wait for the application to be accepted, so we cannot carry on with our investments. We're enthusiastic, we're young, we're dynamic. Trust me, we just would like to invest more for Turkey, and we would like to also contribute to reduce the current deficit of Turkey. And I think it is the way, we can invest on wind. Of course, about this trial process for the EAIs, we receive our license from the Energy Market Regulatory Authority, but the environmental impact assessment from the Ministry of Environment. The baby is born. We have to get approval from 26 different public agencies, and then you have your development plan approved, and then you get your construction permit, and then after the approval by the Minister of Forestry, then you start just working on the construction side. And especially there is the national interest for these power plants, so there is the need to take an action because you have your license, you have your financing available, and at the same time, even in the projects that we make, the turbine agreements, that's a de facto situation. So we just, would like to focus our energy on the construction side and the commissioning of the turbines, but there is bureaucracy and the judicial process. This is not providing any courage to us, and it is challenging. So we started to lose time out of YEKDEM, especially for the environmental impact assessment report, positive ones. I think hopefully the administrative courts will also overrule. Because all the documents are given by the state, and we're just, seeking for the public interest. And that's actually a problem, a challenge that we have. So you're saying, why the reports are rejected? Maybe very briefly you can say the environmental impact assessment reports. There are some of the resources in saying that let's not invest on it, invest wind power. There are certain associations, you all know these societies. All the lawyers know about these NGOs. They are deliberately trying to actually break this process. They open these trials on purpose deliberately. And we have the administrative courts there. And the judges at the administrative courts, for example, they're always asking for an expert opinion. And the experts are selected from the same region. And most of the experts that are not experienced in wind power plants. And therefore it takes too long time. And once this is the case, the administrative court is saying that I no more will accept this impact assessment report. What is the argument? What is the underlying? For example, we have no river. It's just the top of the mountain. And now they're saying that's the migration flow for the fish in a wind power plant and the fish. Even that is actually the rationale you're saying. Yes. No, what I'm saying is, for example, they are not reading our environmental impact assessment. They're just doing copy-paste. Even in my power plant, there's no fish around my power plant. And they're just saying that there is such a problem. The turbines, for example, drying up the forests, or the turbines are killing the beekeeping. We all discuss it with the public disclosure meetings, but the people, the outsiders, most of the time, are saying that they therefore cancel the reports or the approval given to the reports. These are always pursuing public interest, so they have to be under the guarantee and protection of the state. For the last 2 years, that's my only job. I'm just preparing files for the courts. What is missing? We were giving just one folder, now 5 folders that we present. Even the Minister of Environment said, why you include all these details? And then I was saying, I'm even writing down fish, even there's no fish in the river, or there's no river at all around my power plant. This is overtime for the investor and delaying the investment. So we cannot fix this problem. So we're really suffering a lot. And therefore, especially in the wind, in the last 2 years, this is discussed a lot. So, we are just side by side by our government, and we have 62 years of experience as Gürüş, and we are reflecting this experience to the wind. We're just trying to select the best turbines. We're even discussing about the design with our suppliers for the turbine manufacturers. I mean, it's not only us. I mean, I'm speaking about all the other players in the industry. And of course, we now have good localization. We actually have developed suppliers. We have high quality companies investing in Turkey. And we actually have to give them a volume. And to give them a volume, we need new projects. I mean, we have to actually look for the abroad. We also have international projects because you have to do it. And we have good relations with the Turkish suppliers or with suppliers in Turkey. Therefore, high-quality turbine components manufactured, for example, in Turkey, we'd like to use them in the Turkic republics. So maybe it would be nice also to have an additional incentive mechanism for this, because there's a huge potential. I mean, we ask the investors to come. I mean, as a citizens of the Turkish Republic, we ask them to come to Turkey. And we also have to actually offer them job opportunities. So we'll have the state-of-the-art technology in Turkey. And as of last year, the generators are also manufactured in Turkey. So probably for the Middle East and the CSI countries, we actually will be the leader. And thanks to the Turkish engineers, because more than 90% of them are Turkish. And we know that they are very actually happy to invest in Turkey. Another topic that I have, each and every investor can be a part of this license pre-license period. Even if, for example, you're a tailor, I mean, you actually have to prove that you're a good tailor. So, if, for example, the companies do not have enough experience in the power industry, I don't know, it will be nice at the TWEC projects or during the licensing, at least there must be a certain level of experience. At least the professionals will be applying. Once I first started the wind investments in 2007 at Ben Wind Power Plant, I said, are you selecting a proper turbine? Are you doing the proper measurements? But of course, more importantly, is there a good feasibility plan? I'm an engineer, I also know that. For example, even when I check whether the value, whether there's any difference in the value, the actual value 1 year later, and the one that we predict at the feasibility plan. I mean, especially with my own team, even, for example, I go and physically go to the site. For example, I even had 32,000 steps a day. Why I'm doing this? If you have respect for your profession, even for the location of the turbine, you physically go and do it. I mean, because you have respect to the Turkish Republic, you have to position it at the proper location. That is actually national wealth. For example, several turbines are mislocated, and even there is production very much under the values. Of course, especially we have to check what we produce next year. I don't know, it would be nice to have a control mechanism. We're trying our best. I mean, the capacity factors are trying to be kept high. For example, while performing the investment, if I did a wrong investment, it also has an impact on Erol's investment, because you just reduce the capacity factor of the Turkish Republic. So experience is important. And while for the supply of your components, you have to work shoulder to shoulder with your suppliers. We go to their factories, we work together, we do the controls together. Just as an example, I visited a factory, quite a big one. I'm actually a welding engineer, and I spent probably 32 years at the construction site. I started as a field engineer, and now I'm the general manager. And we had a great meeting, and on the way down I said, actually the welder is not using the gas properly. And I said, you will see the undercut there. And they thanked me. I mean, the owner of the same company took down my notes, and according to those notes, they actually do the correction. And the Turkish engineers have a lot of experience in this manufacturing industry. So, especially, I think we have to make the turbines of high quality. And whatever we have to do, we will do it. Another important topic, wind, solar, hybrid, also discussed. Maybe the regulations, you're preparing the regulations. Maybe hybrid can easily be used at geothermal and the wind. So I think you need to help us about the hybrid, again, use of energy. Thank you. Now, before I move to the second panelist, I asked Hakan in the previous panel.
Bizden dinleyicilerden soru oldu mu?
If there are some questions, I asked whether in the previous panel there were Q&A session. There was no Q&A session in the previous panel, but if you need, maybe we can also reserve some time for the Q&A. Is there any such demand? Do you think you are willing to ask questions? I think, yes, even there is one person to ask a question, we have to give them the opportunity to talk. And so we also will have a Q&A session for 10-15 minutes. And then that's how we will complete.
Ali Bey'in ifade ettiği husus.
Moving on from where Ali stopped, do you think I better make an assessment?
Bizden sonra, tamamından sonra daha iyi olur.
Okay, we'll just wrap up at the end of the session. So we are going to move on to the next panelist. From Exim Investment Holding, Sabahattin Er will be taking the floor. Welcome, Mr. Er.
Biz Exim Yatırım Holding olarak
As Exim Investment Holding, currently we are operating 6 wind farms, and we have the operating capacity of 382, and there will be 2 more PPs to come in, and by the end of next year it will reach 460 megawatts capacity in 8 wind farms. Next to it, 2 hydros and 1 biodiesel, but at the R&D level, of course. Now, Mr. Ali Karaduman talked about things that are actually the common problems of investors, particularly those having more than one investment, and as we are, because we are dealing with 8 projects, and there are about 20 fields that we have participated in the auctions for, and we've made some project development for these projects. So I have to say that our teams have been there in many different fields of Turkey, in many parts of Turkey, taking care of different projects. And I can say that it's an adventure of about 13 years in wind power. But unfortunately, I have to say that compared to the primary years, although we've had some improvement in permitting, similar problems are still there, and we're experiencing similar problems as well. These may be sometimes local problems that may have something to do with the relevant agencies, and sometimes we are having some problems in sensitivities of the local people, particularly in those local places where they are on the seaside. They may be rightful to a certain degree, but the wind investors will have to fight with these reactions all the time. To give a simple example, we had a project in Aegean region. We were sued, and there were some lawsuits brought against the project. if you would ever ask even the school students what the vegetation is in the Aegean region, it's not a foreign forest, and it's never a forest in the Aegean region, and it's always bushes and this kind of greenery. And we were written an expert report before the court, and they even detailed fauna and flora in such a way that it's the rainforests we're just devastating. And it's always these kind of endemic plants and animal species they've listed down. And it's really puzzling you how people can come up to these conclusions. So this is not the only problem, of course, we're having, but similar processes I'm sure that all of the investments are going through in Turkey. At this very point in time, we're about to consume the projects. Quite naturally, depending on the termination of YEKTEM. By 2020, they will be completed. This, as discussed in the morning session and in the previous session also, this will lead to a reduction in the volume of works. According to the recommendations of the previous meetings, since capacity increase was to be introduced quickly, this would make sure that the sector remains vivid. But unfortunately, according to the capacity increase applications filed this year, the replies as expected by the investors were not provided. In readily available, permitted farms, actually with, permits for the access ways, increasing the capacity would facilitate new capacity to be introduced. This is expected to make sure that the other investors would sustain the vivid level of their works. But, this is a stagnation that we are expected to face in the near future. Existing projects are not being performed due to several reasons. According to the studies by TWEC, by the association, a 5,000 megawatt capacity is discussed. And then about 2,400 expected to come from the 3,000 megawatts. But, these are the 5,000 megawatts that are expected to extend. They're somehow postponed because, the investors do have a different perspective about these projects. In the morning, we were informed that 2,000 megawatt is expected to be introduced in April, but you would appreciate that the 3,000 megawatts auction performed 3 years ago. No news yet. And the applications will be received and then the auction is to be done. But it'll take several years until they can be implemented, obviously. When looking into the wind market and reading the news about the wind market, in October, I've read that the Economy Ministry of Germany so as to prevent the stagnation in the onshore wind sector, wind energy, they've put in place an action plan. And I checked the details of the action plan. 164,000 megawatts of installed capacity is there. 54,000 of it onshore is in Germany. Currently installed capacity is 7,700 in Turkey. Now, in the first half of 2019, installations of wind power plants in Germany also narrowed down by 12%, realizing at the level of 300,000 megawatts. And the German Ministry of economy is seeking some ways out of this. And probably on October the 8th or 9th, I think, Altmaier, the Minister of Economy in Germany, made a press release and press conference, I think, just announcing the details of the action plan. Accordingly, there are 18 items on the list, and they say that these items will have been accomplished by the end of 2020. I mean, they have deadlines for each items on the list. And I'd like to ask all the audience, as we've seen in the morning session, in Turkey, everybody is prioritizing the wind energy, including investors, public, private sector, and the citizens who consider this as an environmental friendly investment. We're at the level of 7,700, and in our wind installations, there has been a decline in the last 2 years, and unless measures are taken, unfortunately, we are concerned that there may be another narrowing. Okay, it's 54,000 megawatts of installed onshore, more than 7,000 offshore, meaning more than 61,000 megawatts of wind capacity. And yet, Germany takes extra measures because of the stagnation in the wind energy in 2019. So the Ministry of Economy has the urge of preparing an action plan accordingly. I would suggest that there are lessons to be learned out of it. Well, how about the 18 items on the list? As Mr. Ali said, it's always about the problems of wind investors, like, construction permits, building permits, lawsuits, federal and local permits, local authorities, different practices. And one thing that captured my attention was we have the permits about flights, about the Turkish airports and ports authority. The old generation war equipment is to be replaced with the new generation DWAR devices. Now we have some experience about war and DWAR equipment, because 2 years ago in a field of ours we made this exchange experiencing this. So they've identified 18 items, giving a deadline to complete all the tasks on the action list. A country having more than 61,000 megawatts of a capacity, starting this action because of the stagnation of their system probably should make us think about the future measures we can take on this. Thank you. Well, thank you. Now we're moving on to Demirer Holding. Mr. Erol Demirer is taking the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Ali, you referred to fish. Were there flying fish? Wind in Turkey, okay, started with baby steps, and after YEKDEM accelerated a lot. We've come up to 1,500 megawatts annually and started to lose speed. Why? Because as years passed by, auctions started to be more challenging, and probably the power plants taken, the turbines, when taken under challenging conditions, were harder to build. Second biggest challenge was about the permits. When we first started, it was vague what kind of permits we needed to take, and in the contract we were asked 5-year fuel agreement that came to us. But now, contrary to that, the permits are following each other, and we're just, stuck into a lot of permits. Even if we know the path, we don't know the traffic that will take us to that point of destination. And of course, one thing that accelerated the process was capacity increases. Capacity increases really mattered both for the investors and for the authorities. It was an economic, a cost-effective investment because the YEKDAM period was not 10 years, but I mean, how many years left? That would be the time. Win-win situation. But now this also lost pace. Why? Because of missing capacity in the region. What is the reason for blocking the capacity? The auctions that are quite challenging. System is blocked. Therefore, the power plants that can be introduced quite quickly, I think, are unfortunately stuck in a way. We should pave the way for this. The first auction was 2007. In the first days, we won reasonable things, and as the days passed by, everybody increased their prices to win, and the auction took about 8 days. And in the first 3 days, we won all that we could win, and in the rest days, I mean, we couldn't win. Then in the next auction, we couldn't win. And in the next one, we said, okay, the figures that will come up there, we cannot cover. And these are not affordable. I mean, it was beyond our imagination that came up. Yes, figures. And we were not upset because we couldn't win. These are all the reasons that blocked the system, in my opinion. Now, YEKDAM was quite a good, well-functioning system, but permits, as I said, the farms are not finished before 5 or 6 years. We have one that is to be commissioned nowadays, and 2 are about to finish their permits. So it's a big risk not to be able to catch the deadline for the YEKDAM, and it's fearsome, not only for us, but also for the financial agencies. It's not, I mean, never. If you miss, the opportunity, then you will not have any other chance. I mean, if we were to be given some time, some opportunity to delay, maybe it would have been better. So the normally starting ones will have been finished by 2031. And let's fix that date, if you ask me, and the delayers will lose their years as they delayed. This way we wouldn't hit the wall, but it would still give a motivation to hurry. Every moment, the investors also will be losing something, but shouldn't be killing the project. I think this can be the best solution for the problem we're going through. I mean, if you would miss this date, everything is over. Or we can say if we delay, we would lose some, and then if we delay further, we would lose some more. I think this would be a better opinion. And of course, permits, lawsuits, we're also pushed with these, but these are, the realities of life. Let me not take too further, but, number one is let's not limit the beginning, but the end of YEKDAM. Number two is capacity increases are blocked. Let's just make it possible to increase capacity. Thank you. Now, from Borusan Energy, Mehmet Acarlı will be taking the floor. Thank you, sir. As one can understand from the name, Borusan EMBV is a merger, Borusan and German EMBV. Currently, we have only limited to wind, 450 megawatts of capacity, and then hydroelectricity and solar. after August 2018, we have taken another investment decision for a project of 210 megawatts that is in construction. I'm just intentionally saying this because back then it was a big thing. I mean, it was not very wise to take this investment decision with a German investor, but our German investor believed in Turkey too much, so we decided to invest in the project. Now, maybe starting with that point, I think would just be better to understand. There are ongoing investments, and there are the investments that will benefit from the existing YEKDAM system. Maybe about the future of these projects we better talk on, because under normal conditions in these projects, of course, unless there are some lawsuits, permits were taken in a given time. But in this very point, unfortunately, and we have to say that it never was mentioned, but wind investors do have a big problem with the Ministry of Forestry. Not just wind, but almost all the renewable investors. To my knowledge, probably 36 projects with a total 1,400 megawatts of a capacity are awaiting before the Ministry of Forestry. Some are waiting for more than 18 months, either at preliminary or final permits. But this was a process that took about 2 months. Now it goes up to 18 months. Now, this is leading to the result that similar projects will not be able to benefit from YEKDAM. In this respect, we need to stop the project, even if an investment decision was taken, because feasibility works were done accordingly, and no investor would be willing to invest in a project without any feasibility anymore. Therefore, within this permit time, we need to, in a way, talk to the Ministry of Agriculture, and I know that there is the coordination board for investments, to clarify the reason for suspending. So I'm not looking for any bad intentions there, but we need to clarify the reasons behind suspending the process so as to make the process transparent. I think we need to intervene this gangrenous problem because it's really severe. I mean, imagine the investor goes for a pre-permit, waits for months, even if they get the pre-permit, even if the construction is completed, you need to go there and wait for the final permit, and no one knows how long that will take today. On the other hand, is it done, to expire the process of YEKDAM? Because this is the question mark in the minds of the investors, but I never want to think that way. I don't think the government would opt for this way. But we need to check that currently, last year in 2018, the total renewable generation is somehow like 97 terawatts per hour. It's worth equal to $4.8 billion worth gas consumption. So we are avoiding this thanks to renewables. And wind corresponds to 1 billion gas consumption prevented. Of course, about the environmental impacts we can speak about. In almost all the renewables, 54 million tons of carbon dioxide emissions avoided, 11.1 million thanks to wind. Similar values are also applicable in the first 10 months of 2019, meaning that every year the share of renewable energy and wind in particular is corresponding to 5 million and 1 million wind only contribution every month. Therefore, On one side, we're in a period YEKDEM was discussed a lot, but we know that YEKDEM, I mean, if it were not for YEKDEM, these investments wouldn't have been made. At that time, investors found the level to be quite low, but it was a baseline figure, and when the banks are to finance, they used to get it as the minimum level and calculate it accordingly. They could get their funds accordingly. Therefore, after 2015, with the extreme lowering of the market prices, all the facilities started to get coverage by YEKDEM, and there was no problem in terms of repay of these credits. I think YEKDEM has been quite useful in terms of the banking system. In Turkey, almost $45 billion worth of loans provided to investors in Turkey, and in about the ones related to renewables, there is no problem. They are paid back, I mean, quite efficiently, but other than that, in gas or coal, we know there are some problems out there. Of course, they're to be overcome one by one. But I mean, all this triggered the fact that in a world without YEKDEM, or I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be YEKDEM. I mean, without a purchase guarantee with a fixed pricing, can be either dual or mutual agreements, like a sales contract to a distribution company. But you know, without this long-term fixed price sales facility, banks, I'm afraid, will not be able to supply credits to new investments under the conditions of the day.
Evet, belli 2015'te
After 2015, yes, YEKDEM was considered or somehow to be a financial burden, but we need to check the benefits as well. What were the impacts on the electricity prices? I mean, in lowering the electricity prices, probably there was an influence of the increase in the share of renewables. Of course, and we need to look at that. And as the renewable generation increases, probably the electricity prices will be lowered even further. And checking with the total environment, I think there are room for improvements. Maybe other than that, about the level of technology, about the effectiveness of the turbines. In the CapExes,
olan düşüşler
the reductions, the decline in the turbine cost should be considered. I mean, when a new incentive mechanism is to be set or a new YEKDEM is to be introduced, these criteria will need to be taken in consideration. But we should know that without a fixed price purchase guarantee, the projects, I mean, maybe after 2011, but I mean, it may also be 2017 projects, I don't think they are quite likely to be accomplished. So there is the need for some kind of incentive. And also we need to look into the auction system. I mean, it's not only about the YEKDEM, presence of YEKDEM or not. Turkey made a lot of trials in the auction system. In 2014 tenders, a total of 5.5 megawatts were auctioned out, and per kilowatt hour there was a contribution fee. I mean, contribution was just defined with Turkish lira back in those days. Now it's only 2,080 megawatts introduced, and the average contribution is 0.3 kurush. It means that the higher contribution fees were unfortunately not introduced. They are just suspended. By the way, one comment to make: if you have developed your project correctly and made a proper calculation and made a correct calculation of the contribution fee, you will be able to introduce the project, and one of them is about us. 1.08 kurush. The Look project is just working quite well without any problem in the paybacks. So the contribution fee, I'm not saying that the contribution fee must never be present, but you should make a proper calculation. Otherwise, we are speaking about 3,500 megawatts of suspended capacity. Some of it probably will be introduced in use in 2020, but probably 3,000 megawatts will be suspended.
Bu sefer tabii biraz daha da zor.
Same applies for the 2017 auctions, because that was actually contribution fee over US dollar denomination. Especially there is the inflation rate effect also, and if we consider it over the US dollar basis, it is actually at the level of the prices that we have for 2017. I mean, the prices seem to be so shocking, but that's not the case. I mean, the contribution fee at that time over cents, if escalated with the inflation and considered for today, they are actually equal to the US dollar given in 2017. So what is important in here is whether the calculation was originally correct and whether the projects were properly developed or not. And of course, it is possible for those actual projects also to be introduced, but not possible because they cannot find any financing from the banks. Why? Because there is the exchange rate risk and also the market price. Market price in the energy market in general, as you all know, it's not that much free. It's not freely shaped. I don't know, in a totally free market, if it's a predictable market, probably the prices will be actually higher than today. I don't know, maybe the market price would change, maybe the perspective of the banks would be different, but it is mostly the purchasing guarantee. We need these types of agreements. But of course, especially for the upcoming auctions, they actually should be leading us the way. Why? Because what we observe is that in the areas where there is high competition in Turkey, we actually, when we do auction or when we actually introduce these contribution fees, there's no more logic because there's a competition actually. Again, we feel that there is a competition, but that's not the case. Of course, it is. I'm just speaking out of the context, but I mean, we think we are just doing the calculations properly and correctly, despite all. One thing to keep in mind is that for all those projects, I'm sure Zeki would also say the same thing, but the capacity factors of those projects actually have got nothing to do with the previous ones. It's 50% more. In average, 45% of the capacity factor in the projects that we have, and we already have 2 years, and of course it may increase with the new turbines. And in such a case, of course, I think we can possibly calculate how we end up with such figures, but there are other risks, like the US dollar, and as I told you, how the market prices are set. And I think it is also PPA, so with a fixed price, actually to have some bilateral agreements, and there must be a legislation for this. We need a legislative framework for this. There is also a standard.
Şu anda yurt dışı kökenli firmalarda bu tür bir talep yavaş yavaş.
There is also such a demand coming from the international companies. I'm sure that the Turkish companies will also have this chance. But looking as a prospect for the future, for the Turkish investors, I feel that it's not possible to have a good auction without any pain. It's not only about technical competency. Maybe it is also discussed. Maybe let's do the auctions per megawatt, just like we did it in solar, but nothing is commissioned or very few commissioned. Again, as I'm not actually referencing anyone specifically, but I don't know, maybe we did not know to suffer from pain at that time. It will be paid in this amount of period. I don't know, maybe we should start from the beginning, or you actually need to get a high guarantee. Maybe people should think twice or more than twice so as before giving any price. Or they really should suffer from pain, and then they will actually make their proposals. Otherwise, we have no trouble. I mean, it's very transparent and the auctions are perfect, especially the prices are also very attractive. If you're asking me, the public must be very happy with these figures, because it means that the electricity prices will go down. But of course, they should be commissioned, otherwise it doesn't make any sense. And at the same time, they occupy the capacities for many long years, and the Turkish Electricity Distribution Company cannot allocate new capacity. So this actually ends up in a vicious circle for the entire industry. So, maybe one additional point. In wind, it doesn't matter where you invest. There is always a social reaction. Sometimes there could be some lobbies or some interest groups, or even there are people that make money out of it. But on the other hand, I think we also have to make some self-critic. In wind, there is one thing that I feel like something missing. That's the basin planning. For example, while we're just trying to find finance, especially international financing for any project, especially if it is like EBRD, such a sort, then the having a positive environmental impact assessment report only for your project is not enough. I mean, you actually need a wider plan. How many other power plants there are? What is the global effect? They're just looking for the global impact analysis that they ask for, and they never actually provide you financing. These are the international finance institutions, and the Turkish banks also started to ask for the same thing. Therefore, I think the public also should consider this, and you have to ask for basin planning. For the hydropower plants, it was not done initially, and it caused a lot of trouble. We still have ongoing problems. In wind, I think I did not want the same thing to be the same. There is intensity at certain regions, even power plants that are affecting each other. There is actually a social reaction. It can eventually end up with a social reaction. I think there is the need for a proper planning for all of these, and it is the public that is in charge of doing this. I mean, if you leave it at the discretion of the investor, they will not do it, because the investors are always pursuing for profitability. Where would be the best, most productive for my turbines? So they will not consider what is around. So I think also the public also should be considering this. Yes, thank you for your contribution. Lastly, from Polat Enerji, Zeki Eriş, please. Let's listen to what he'll be saying, and then we'll make an assessment altogether. Thank you for also leaving me the floor and at least giving me some other things to discuss. I'm sure you will not run out of topics. I'm sure you'll find something to discuss. Now, first of all, for Hakan, I think we all should thank him. That is actually the most comprehensive and most high quality, TWEC conference that we have. And I also would like to thank you, dear Minister, as I always mention it on all occasions. If you're asking me for myself, and this is the case for the others, your doors are always open to the investors, and the problems of the investors have always been such, also while you were at the regulatory authority, and you are actually an asset for the industry. That is important because it's actually a new synergy, and you also have a good approach So I have no doubt that it will be very good for the industry. The second thing I would like to mention is, you all mentioned about your megawatts. I also will speak about my own megawatts. 600 megawatt, and we are the champion of the industry. And again, we have with the 70 million Turkish liras of contribution pay, and that is actually the leader in the largest in wind and also in solar as well. As Zeki Eriş, I guess 29 years ago, I stepped in the Ministry of Energy. I think I was the first person actually that contact with the Ministry of Energy. 29 years, and I had seen a lot during those times. And of course, I'm more than honored to be the leader of a great team and also to be the stakeholder of the industry. So let's make a wrap up. Now we have a couple of challenges. The first thing is that we have many projects that receive a license but cannot be constructed. We also have new capacities that we would like to build, and we also have capacity increases. For the projects that we cannot continue with, I just have a couple of solutions, and I would like to open it to the discussion. Especially the biggest problem about the power plants that we cannot construct is either the escalated contribution pays that goes so up in 20 years. I think it is 6.4 cents that I pay from the applications of November 2017. But of course, if one person can possibly do this, it doesn't mean that everyone can do it. I mean, I have no doubt that, especially in the upcoming 1 year or 2 years' time, it is minus 2.5 US dollars that I will be actually commissioning a power plant, but it doesn't mean that everyone can do this. The conditions can be different for Borusan, for Demirer, or for Polat Energy. What are the conditions? It's all about the turbine selection, about access to financing, or about the AQTs, or the return on investment. These are all different factors in investment. These factors, if one for everyone, then there will not be 10 turbine manufacturers, only 1 or 2. There will not be hundreds of investors, but only 4 or 5 investors in front of us. Therefore, the problem should be solved in such a way that it is acceptable for everyone. For example, the contribution pays over US dollar, and there is a decree by the presidency. If, for example, you have no foreign exchange revenue, then you cannot get financing in foreign exchange. And it's all about how the foreign exchange will be converted, how it will be calculated. So what we have to do is, you actually have to convert it immediately as the authority, and if possible, even maybe a discount, and again, maybe off-take for those who can pay in cash, or at least we will discuss with the banks over a certain amount. And same for the Turkish lira contribution pays, you can do the same thing. For example, as the state, you can identify a certain generation level depending on the turbines, the types of the turbines. Like you mentioned, there's a 30% capacity factor at one region, and these capacity factors can go up to 40-45 because of the turbines that you're using. So you can have 20 years of the total energy consumption. I will make such a discount. And if you also pay in cash, then I will make a further discount. I think you have to consider those. Why we cannot actually continue with the projects, the licensed ones that we have in hand? Because in 2007, in 2010, 15, at different times, we received different applications, and we divide Turkey into different regions. But now, the regions also have changed. For example, the Turkish electricity generation company at that time for Istanbul region, the Çanakkale, Bursa, Balıkesir, for example. Now it covers İzmir, Manisa, Aydın, Muğla. Turkey is evolving, Turkey is changing, and also the workflow changed in Turkey. Industry, for example, is dynamic. It moves from one place to the other, but we are static. And especially the projects that cannot be performed there maybe should be relocated. I don't know, maybe they can offer 2 or 3 alternatives, and you, as the Minister of Energy, can be leaders for this, so we actually have to redesign it. I think it is the time. I think these projects cannot move from one to the other. As I told you, I don't know if the Ministry of Forestry or the State Highways Authority, they actually cause some trouble in the process, but you cannot cancel these projects. Why? Because there are several court verdicts, therefore the investors are, it's a constitutional right, you go to the court and you have given me the license, and it is because of the state that I cannot actually continue with my project, and you cannot cancel it. As you would remember, those that are cancelled, you cannot no more, you cannot get your collaterals, your guarantees, and then they actually have to give new licenses. If you're asking me, the ministry, the regulatory authority, and all the other relevant public agencies should set up a commission. I don't know, maybe they have to invite the investors and discuss in detail and one by one what your problems are, what can I do for you, because we have the power, we have the finance to do this. I mean, all the investors, I mean, it's 5 megawatts and 500 megawatts. It doesn't matter how much you invest. And as long as we actually have a nice incentive, I think the banks are also willing to provide financing. But you actually have to offer us the solution, and you should be able to telling us, for example, you actually away from the 10 megawatts and so on. And remember the November the 1st, 2007 auctions, I don't know, İlhan Özşahin, for example, invited us, said this is not the case. And at that time, the regulatory authority said, now the gentlemen, just go back and then come back again with better capacities. And the capacities, they did not like to the same substation. If there's 100 megawatt and 4 people, 25 each, then you can do it. So I can say we know what the solutions are. We're experienced about this, but I think you should be the leader for this. And it is the time that you actually deal with it in person. And we also no more have the capacities. The capacity increase actually was a hope. And we were expecting for the legislative change, the legislation change. They said sell it to the free market. It's okay, we can do it. What is important is actually to have more investments. And this time, the TWEC said stop, because it is 2,000, 3,000 megawatts of a license that I've already given, but it is not under construction. Yes, that is right, but they already have the license. You're saying you cannot do it. Maybe someone else would come and do it. They're also right. TWEC is right. For example, I'm offering, if there is any capacity in that region, I actually commit that I will do it myself, and with my own capacity increase. Why I cannot use it? For example, someone received a license, it is minus $1.5%. If I have 100 megawatt of a capacity increase, I actually have 100 megawatt capacity increase. That is a right given to me. As I told you, with the discount method, by converting into Turkish liras, I have no doubt that I can possibly, with cash money, I will pay it to a bank, and I can actually use this power plant within my own capacity increase. So you will actually fix the problem, the power plants that cannot be constructed, and as you all know, you already have the auxiliary roads, the substation, the transmission line, everything is ready, for example, because it's a national matter, as you mentioned. So we will turn it into the interest of the country. We can easily do it. I don't want to take more of your time, but lastly, what I would like to say is we need a mobilization about this environmental impact assessment and so on, which I believe is extremely important. We need the mobilization effort. We need to raise the awareness of the public through Ministry of National Education, Forestry, Ministry of Finance, with the Treasury. We should all sit around the same table. We should have training campaigns. Even renewable energy, how it is, it must be in the textbooks of the primary school. Even if you cut down, for example, one tree, but one turbine would mean tens and thousands of plants and trees. I don't know, with maths, with graphs, with advertisement campaigns, with videos on the TV, through the press, through the media. We have to educate the people. That is the biggest problem that we have. Why? We have public disclosure meetings, for example, with the participation of the people, with the public. And they're telling us, the villagers, for example, the citizens, the people, the local people there, are telling us, let's just finish this power plant. Otherwise, they will come here and there will be quarries and all these trees will be cut down. That's what they're telling us. So just build that wind power plant immediately. If you do so, we'll have easy access for wildfires, and there will be camera monitoring, and there will be security gates, there will be an audit there. That's what people are expecting from us. But we cannot tell it to the people. I mean, even I guess the press, for example, should be educated as well. We have to take them to those sites, to the power plants, and how important it is for the economy, for employment. Soma thermal power plant, for example, it is we are actually 300 megawatt wind power plants that I have, and I think I'm not expecting the record to be broken. And we have over 10 villages, and we ask the kids from the village. We take them. We ask them what is wind, how many trees that we actually cut down, and we educate them about the wind power plant and about the environmental impact. And I think it is the time for this mobilization from the president and from the minister. We ask for actually concrete steps to be taken. That's our kind request. Thank you for your attention. I think it is for the first time that no one asked me to stop, actually. I'm doing it myself.
Efendim, tüm panelist arkadaşlara ben
Thank you very much for all the panelists. Of course, there are a couple of issues that I would like to discuss with you. I would like to make a wrap-up. And then, if there is any need for Q&A, we will have a very brief Q&A session altogether. Yes. First of all, about the capacity allocation so far, about how many power plants commissioned, about the pre-licensed ones, I actually have the figures. These are not the October, but from the August. Maybe there could be some minor differences. And some of those are already commissioned, I suppose. It was 7,259. I think it is around 7,500 now. So, over 10,000 megawatts of licensed VPP that we have, WPP that we have, 7,259 in commission. But these are the August figures. 2,958 left out of the license scope. Under construction, I mean, should be under construction. Maybe some of those are under construction, I don't know, maybe because of some of the challenges not started yet, but as you all know, all the investors at certain intervals actually should report to the regulatory authority, to the market regulatory authority. They present progress reports, and based on those progress reports, they can possibly make comments. And over 3,000 pre-license WPPs that we have. 2,000 megawatts will be introduced by 2020. I mean, we will be receiving the applications. That is also the capacities already. I mean, this is not included. Why? Because they are not even at the pre-license phase. And to 1,000 megawatts YECA that we have, that is under the auction, that's also not included. Therefore, if we include also those, 18,000 megawatts would be the capacity. It means that for wind, it is allocated. I mean, we will be allocating it. As you know, almost 6,000 megawatts solar, with or without license in total, is either commissioned or some about to be commissioned. So 24,000 megawatts wind plus solar. That is the capacity allocation. And some of those are in operation, some under construction, and some, again, at the permit process. Why I'm telling you all about these figures? Now, for the grid, the transmission, it is for wind, for solar. I mean, they cannot have a direct control. Why? Because as long as you have sun, you can generate electricity. As long as you have wind, you can generate electricity. Therefore, during the times that they are not working, they actually need to know about the capacity from the others. I mean, I don't want to get into too many details, of course, but the allocation is performed accordingly. It is 25% of the entire capacity that is considered. In July, especially while the scoring was, I think I can say half was allocated already for wind and solar, for the peak load. The reason why we are just forcing for the half is that it is over 20 megawatts of a capacity allocation performed, but considering the peak load and of course considering the utilization capacity factor, almost half of an allocation by considering the peak load calculations. But of course, in terms of capacity increases, I mean, I just mentioned about these figures to discuss about the capacity increases. With regards to capacity increases, our general understanding is that we all know about the peak hour of Turkey. So, depending which region is contributing to what, or to what extent to that peak hour, that's how we consider. So, 25% of that contribution, of course, by also considering the capacity factor, I can say 50%. So whether they reach to the 50% or not, I'm speaking about solar plus wind in here. There are some regions that fail to reach to that level, and we reshape those regions so as to make it much more favorable for the investor. Almost 40 regions that we had, now we reduce it down to 12, 13, so they can compensate, and it will have a trade-off. So it would be much more possible to make capacity increase. So the request for capacity increase can be covered. I mean, considering the values, the figures that we have for today. But as you would appreciate, when wind or sun in the regions where we have high winds and also too much sun, for the investors that ask for capacity increase, they cannot actually get what they want. And in the upcoming years, there will be new peak load values, and depending on whether to what extent the demand is met by the generation. So as Zeki proposed, maybe there are some capacities that we know that will not be constructed. Maybe we can make use of them as a capacity increase, whether it would be possible.
Koşulları sürekli kapasite artışının yapılabilmesine yönelik zorlayarak.
So we're just forcing our conditions in the favor of the investors so as to have more capacity increase, but of course the technicalities should be considered. And there is also the legal side, as you would appreciate, because we already have the auctions completed. They all have different requirements, and therefore, I mean, changing one condition would be a problem for the future investors. I mean, they can tell us that you're just changing the rules of the game. They can say that, for example, this is not fair. So that is how we consider. But of course,
Gerek buradaki yatırımcılar, gerekse salondaki
our investors here in Turkey, our investors here in the audience, and of course for all the investors other than the wind industry, I would like to congratulate them, because as Zeki Bey stated, as you would appreciate, we actually talk to all the investors. Our gates are open. I don't know, maybe from time to time we are just delaying the appointments just because of the heavy schedule that we have, bad business schedule that we have. But we're always open to listen to you, and our main goal is actually lift the obstacles in front of you and try to make things really attractive for you.
ve sizleri dinlediğimizde
And we listen to you.
gerçekten ne kadar
And when we listen to you, we understand your challenges. We are aware of those challenges. During the construction of a wind power plant, even you mentioned about the migratory routes of the fish, although there is actually even no river in that site. Think about it. I'm sure you have so many obstacles as such. Of course, despite all these obstacles and challenges, still in renewable energy, we have reached to a certain level. And of course, I just would like to congratulate the investors, because they dedicated themselves and they are really still successful to make these investments, and they still devote themselves for these investments despite all these challenges. So congratulations for all.
kapasite artışlarıyla alakalı değerleri
With regards capacity increases, that's what I can say. Of course, notwithstanding the ECDEM, up to a certain period, we can grant this right, and then there could be a delay of 1 year or 2 years. At least maybe, I enjoyed this suggestion, and I think we can use it. That is also my personal opinion. I mean, as the panel stated, eventually the investor is willing to do the investment. However, because of something out of his control, because of the delay caused by the other public agencies, by the end of 2020, they will not be exercising these rights. So, I don't know, maybe with the prices of 2021, even that investment would no longer be feasible. But of course, the investor already made several expenditures. So I also will consider the suggestion and maybe it would be possible to make such a legislation. And with regards the renewable energy legislation, we're now working on revising the legislation. I don't know, maybe in 10 or 15 days it will be completed. Of course, the law will be, of course, passed to the parliament, and they actually have to give approval to this draft bill. And I'm sure that majority of the discussions that we made in here, even majority of the things that we discussed before, will be included. That's our target in that draft law. It's not discussed in here, but at different meetings and also in your personal contacts, you always mention about this, about the localization, the local rate. There is a mechanism that you can only possibly make it out of YEKDEM. So we're just trying to make no more correlation between YEKDEM and the local rate. So about the local product contribution, it's not going to be like you have to use YEKDEM. I mean, there's going to be a new mechanism that will separate the local content with this. Even for the projects without any license, again, about the local content, we will have a mechanism that also local content would be possible. With regards to auction, from time to time, you know, we tried all different methodologies for the auctions, like with contribution pay, initially per megawatt. They actually gave a proposal recently, the minimum price. That was actually the methodology. So different auctions planned so far. So we all had several problems with them. They all have their own problems, of course, but of course the main goal in here is, of course, to make it an auction that is feasible, that is realistic, especially in the new law with regards to auction. In the draft law, we would like to write down that the methodology for the auction will be defined by the implementing regulation. So there will be no need actually to correct the law or to change the law through the parliament. So it takes time. And because you are making several suggestions, and therefore maybe, I don't know, we can test some of your suggestions in these auctions. And of course, I don't know, you can also increase the number of these suggestions. But of course, there is actually the need to have a minimum price base. So it is not going to be possible actually to have lower prices than the minimum price. If, for example, a couple of participants to the auction decided to actually go down that price, at least they will continue with the auction over a certain megawatt. Therefore, I mean, it must be feasible. It actually should guarantee the feasibility of these projects. Maybe that could be one of the suggestions. There is also another suggestion.
Uzaklaşmaya başlandıkça
As we move away from the real figures,
acıtıcı, ciddi teminatlar konsun ki
some, big amount of guarantees can be placed so that the participants who can really give those guarantees can attend the realistic figures. When the realistic figures are given, letters of guarantee amounts can be lowered. I mean, a lot of recommendations are coming from your side. So every time and any time when there is the need to make changes there, the regulation can be amended so that we can meet those changes. Speaking of which, I think it's worth noting about investment coordination and permit durations. Of course, these are the biggest problems that the investors are just bound with the permits. I mean, the time to permit. About investment coordination, there was previously a coordination board which is somehow enlarged today, taking care of the investments on energy and mining at a time. But you know that in the ministry there are three deputy ministers. I'm taking care of the electricity. There is someone who's taking care of natural gas, nuclear. Now, the circular stipulates that the relevant authorities will need to be coordinated with in the way the board is functioning. First, there is a first and general overview meeting with the sector, where from you can also give us some feedback, and the general feedback from your side will be referred to the other public authorities. And then, as Zeki has just explained, both wind and other plans that are still underway will be subject to a unit that will be comprised soon. And this will make sure that the investors will be asked about their potential problems on the investment, whether this can be brought to the coordination board or not. Just to hear their comments on it. In the presence of any situation that requires coordination, the next meetings can be held on a project basis or a planned basis. Maybe, this can be too much initially, but after a certain, power, we can limit the content of these meetings. So with these project-based meetings, we will continue with the coordination boards. It's the power plants that we are having some problem in terms of sites. Therefore, the power plants, the wind power plants are the ones that request a lot of site modifications. And Mr. Zeki has a recommendation, and I also would like to pass on to the good news here. As I said, almost 40 projects are, project sites are there. And EBDK can only make a sign change within the borders of that site. STH, we want to reduce the number of sites. Therefore, we want to bring it down to 10, 12, 13, I think. I may be mistaken with the number of sites. But since we are now becoming a site, with these kind of quantities, if the investors agree, they can go to a site change, unlimited, with the previously 40 locations. If the city that he's working in has become a larger site, he may find another site to move the plant, which I think will be facilitating the site inquiries of the investors. Hopefully, at least for some of the investments, we will be relieving some obstacles. About the transparency of the forestry permit processes, I think this is one of the most rightful requests, and we've talked this with the Ministry of Forestry, and the investor should know that there is nothing arbitrary, and that the problems or about the criteria are just clarified. And the Ministry of Forestry, by the way, says that the investors should pay attention to cutting minimum number of trees. They are not that sensitive, and I'm just giving you figures, out of my head. I mean, if according to the previous projects, 100 trees are to be cut. When you force it, I mean, this may go down to 50. So you can get down to a more feasible way of cutting trees. So we're asking the investors to be sensitive about it. This is their perspective. And let me tell you about it. By the way, the Ministry of Forestry is keeping a lot of permits suspended, and it's mostly that ministry that the investors are just suffering from. This is what we know. Therefore, making these processes transparent is extremely important for us, and they should clarify which conditions are required for the investors to get their permits. And of course, there are some other fields that we need to exchange more details upon, but hopefully there we'll get some progress there. About a month ago, under the organization of EYÜD, we held a smaller scaled meeting, but with attendees from different production types, but the people who came to represent the wind powers mostly complained about the delays in construction permits and how these are held in an arbitrary way. Different procedures are applied in between the municipalities, so there is no standardization. I've just collected some written examples from you, the investors, and I've also talked with the Ministry of Urban Affairs.
Bu yaşadığınız sorunları da Çevre Şehircilik Bakanlığı'nın ilgili genel müdürüne aktarıp yatırımcılarımız
In the weeks to come, we'll be talking to the relevant departments of the Ministry of Urban Affairs to also let them know about the problems of investors, because you know investors are facing different demands of the local authorities, particularly about licensing. I mean, the list of documents even may sometimes be different, so there is no standardization, and the investors are complaining about it. How can we make sure there is a standard way of applying it, and even just to make sure that we can get it from the Ministry of Urbanization as the only authority. In the weeks to follow, we'll be talking that, and the results probably will be announced back to you, maybe through the association, TWEC. About hybrid, lastly, and you know, for hybrid, early this year, I guess, there was an amendment in the legislation that would pave the way for hybrid. And then, as the secondary legislation, EPDK made a draft as to how they're willing to implement it, and it's now open to your comments, and probably after your feedback, and I'm guessing that it must be over, the experts will come together to make an assessment over your feedback. And considering the feedback from you, we will be sending it to the official gazette. But quite roughly, actually, since the wind power plants are located in a large field, it's probably the geothermal and the solar that will give some advantages, and you already know it and you're following it, I'm sure. But just to clarify about the process, we're about to come to the end of this process there. Any further question after all these clarifications?
Çok kısa olmak üzere, çünkü vaktimizi de doldurduk gibi.
We've consumed our time, though. But maybe we'll have room for a few questions, if any.
Mikrofon var mı? Tabii bilmiyorum. Ha, varmış.
Mehmet Örgen.
I'm from RGS Holding. We are not energy investors, but we have some industrial investments rather. As Mr. Zeki said, up to 500 megawatts, we're embracing all projects. Thank you very much for TWEC, for the wonderful organization. And I also would like to thank all of you. As Mr. President of EPDK said, there will be no relief if there is no complaint. And I'm just complaining, just relieve me. Because we have the same problems. We have one wind plant, 16 turbines, and 8 extensions. Everything is ready. Access ways are ready. But since it's in Balıkesir, in the July map, it looks 0. I mean, everything is so ready that maybe we can finish in 6 months if we start. But I understand now from the talks, there is no light at the end of the tunnel. But everything is ready. I mean, just find us a way out. Maybe you can just put it somewhere in your notes. And the same way for Yekdem. As Mr. GM of Borusan rightfully said, Yekdem, we're talking for the new power plants, the ones for 2020, that is right. But it seems to me that some of the plants will continue but hit the wall. And guarantees like long-term purchasing agreement will be needed. This can be considered as a complaint as well. Thank you. Okay. Two things. One is about the EIA, environmental impact assessment lawsuits. Now, about the courts refusing these lawsuits, but I mean it's not possible yet. The thing is, expropriation law, as in the expropriation laws, I mean the courts can be given some time, but this must be done under a law. The local court can be given some time, or the administrative court, to be resolving, of course, of the lawsuit. You mean? Yes, to give a verdict in a given time. But of course, when there is public interest, it should be limited with these projects. And other than, of course, it may not be possible to limit or to engage the court. This is my first note. I think this is also relevant. About the local content, and there is something that you have also emphasized, and that it can also be extended to unlicensed projects.
Yapılan projelere de verilmesinin yerli aksamın kullanılmasını destekleyeceğini düşünüyorum.
Onlara da tabii, onlara.
Evet.
And I also think that this can also be extended for the local content projects. Thank you.
O da kapsamın içerisinde.
Evet.
Buyurun.
İyi akşamlar.
Suzan Batu from Senso Engineering Company. Firstly, I'd like to thank the TWEC family for the wonderful organization. It is really exciting to increase the megawatt capacities of the turbines in Turkey. And yet, of course, there is a turbine stock that is getting aged in Turkey. About that, how would you suggest that the investors would plan make their plans? Thank you. Anyone who'd like to, comment on this?
Buyurun.
Biz ilk santralı 98'de kurmuştuk. 22 yaşına geliyor. Biz bakım ekibimizi kurarak onları işletiyoruz.
Well, how we are doing the commissioning is that our next power plant will be at Bozcaada. It will be completing the 20th year. And I don't know if it is just left there, we just promise to run it. Just an additional comment for this. That's actually a good question, a critical question. The very same problem that we experience at the natural gas industry. The power plants that were commissioned long ago, years ago, but they are no more productive. They were working by 40%, 50, 55% that we are now discussing. Therefore, too much fuel is actually up in the air, all in vain. I think the same will be valid soon in the wind industry. For example, we are the owners of the very first wind power plants in Turkey. That's the reason why contribution of Erol is very important. But in 5 to 10 years of time, probably all these turbines will be idle. So we actually have to be proactive and do something about this. Let me give you an example. One of our very first power plants at Çanakkale, for example, 15 megawatts. And the new turbines, once you put them, it will be 60 million kilowatt hours. So it's actually going to be a huge difference with the new turbines, so it's important.
Yani şimdi bu sorunu dile getirdiniz.
As you come up with a problem, I take down note of this. There's nothing that we're planning for the time being, but just I take down note of it, don't worry. I think there are so many questions, but we have to give an end to the session, maybe 1 or 2 maximum. Distinguished Minister, once again, I would like to open up this forest issue, if you allow me. You know, both in the permit and also, I mean, we have the permit process, for example, for the forest. It was actually with the signature of the director of the regional office that we can get the approval. But now, even it is now going to the president's office and then get back to the minister, and then the minister is signing it. I mean, we mentioned about this for so many times. Therefore, my kind request from you is that maybe under the leadership of you or the Turkish Wind Energy Association, maybe you should organize a meeting. We just have 14 months left. Yes, of course, we can do it, but the Ministry of Energy himself mentioned about this problem. I don't know, maybe we should repeat it. And he, I mean, discussed it in person with the Minister of Forestry. I don't know, maybe we can push it forward. We even discussed it with the President. And trust me, nothing is going on. Trust me. I mean, I'm sincerely telling you that it is just stuck. We cannot go any further. Başak Arsay, I'm a student at Ankara University. From the very first session, I wished for someone to discuss about this, but Zeki already discussed about this social mobilization. I'm actually the last year student at the university. Yes, that's right. There is a need for a mobilization. I even had a project 2 years ago. But I think the investors at the same time, you are the employers, you are in front of us. As for the new graduates, I think you actually have to do something about this. Because we have actually an army of engineers graduating. Myself, I'm sure that there are people alike like me. I don't want to actually make money just to make money. I just believe in renewable energy. So as to stop the climate change, I really would like to work in this field. As we have the investors in here, that's actually quite a huge industry. And thank you very much, because my awareness was also raised. Maybe you should also invest for the new graduates. And I'm sure that there will be more young people to come up just like me. And therefore, as a last year student, I wish you also provide some support for the students.
Evet, biz de teşekkür ediyoruz. Vaktimiz.
Okay, thank you. We're beyond our time limit. So I'd like to thank everyone for staying patiently. And I hope that the session has been useful for all of you. There are many notes that we've taken as the public authority, and hopefully we always will be standing next to the investors, paving the way for them to make the necessary investments.
Devam edeceğiz. Tekrar tüm arkadaşlar
Thank you, all panelists, for your contribution,
ve Hakan Bey'e de böyle bir organizasyon
and would like to thank TWEC for the wonderful organization.
tekrar teşekkür ediyorum ve hepinize saygılar.
Good evening.
Sayın Bakan Yardımcımıza ve panelistlerimize biz de teşekkür ediyoruz ve böylece günü noktalıyoruz.
This brings us to the end of the day. Thank you very much.